friends, brothers, Romans, countrymen, what the heck are we doing with these flip Praetors? Over the past few months, the word engage has crept into my subconscious and my lexicon. I mean, from the standpoint of content creation, it means a euphemism for making videos, basically. Engagement is people clicking, interacting, liking, commenting on videos. There are a lot of ways to drive engagement. Frankly, I don't care for any of them. I don't do a lot of clickbait and all that stuff. From my standpoint, if somebody likes the video, let them click on it, let them like it, or not. You know, this is a hobby for me. It's a way to express myself. I don't need to drive engagement. I mean, it's good, it's fun, it's good to do, but I have a job that I really like that pays my bills. When people talk about engagement for Magic the Gathering, they're talking about basically what you choose to buy. What are you buying? What are you buying? What are you selling? Are you buying singles? Are you buying sealed product? Are you buying pre-constructed decks? Or are you just buying nothing? It got me thinking. Let's say I buy a few packs and pulled one of these flip Praetors. What would I do with them? What decks do they go in? Or do they merit their own decks? They're mythic, so what's good and what's bulk? What's bunk? Let's find out. But first, engage in the dang video, brother. Hit the buttons. Engage the warp drive. You think I'm going in Wooburg order? Nah, we go Brew WG order because that's what we do to subvert expectations, brother. Alright, first up we have Sheoldred, my old ex-girlfriend. 3 black for a legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 4/5 with menace. When Sheoldred enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature or planeswalker. Has 4 and a black, exile it, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery and only if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So on the front we have a big old flesh bag marauder that doesn't hit our creatures. It's got menace, it's a decent combat threat, but nothing particularly special on the front. I dig the art. She's hanging around with a bunch of bugs. She's chilling out and having a brunch, I guess. The transform ability is another 5 mana. It's sorcery speed only and you ain't dodging removal with that. The limitation is dependent on an opponent having some considerable mill. 8 cards. It's doable in a dedicated mill deck, no problem. But I wouldn't expect that unless we're building into it. So that's 10 mana, fair amount of mill for what payoff. On the backside you have the True Scriptures, which is a saga. First chapter, for each opponent destroy up to 1 target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Second chapter, each opponent discards 3 cards, then mills 3 cards. Third chapter, put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. Exile this thing, then return it back to the battlefield face up. As with any of these, just a little caveat, they die to removal, alright? With any permanent that isn't an argument for exclusion. We all play big spells, and if someone removes them, then that's life, but we still run them, right? Because they're doing something for us. The first chapter is close to worth 5 mana just by itself. It's limited removal, so if the problem permanent is other than creature or planeswalker, it's not as good. Chapter 2 feeds the graveyard and acts as pretty powerful resource denial. 3 cards to discard is a lot. Chapter 3 is Rise of the Dark Realms, which is 9 mana. The problem is you have to wait 3 turns. So that kind of underscores my main problem with these cards. It's that they're slow. If you cast Rise of the Dark Realms, it just happens, but this takes an eternity in Commander. 3 turns is a long time, especially when it's telegraphed. Everybody's waiting for it to happen. Overall, I think I would slot this in a Phoenix deck or some other mill commander, perhaps Lazavdimir Mastermind. It's a crazy card with a ton of effects. I don't think I would run this as a commander. It does nothing to further the mill strategy unless you pay 10 mana and wait 2 turns. It's more of a payoff. And look at this guy just spitting hot fire. Urabrask. 2 red for a legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 4/4 with first strike. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Urabrask deals 1 damage to target opponent and add red. As red, exile Urabrask, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery and only if you've cast 3 or more instant and or sorcery spells this turn. I don't know that I'd ever transform this. This is a Storm, Spellslinger payoff, and enabler. How many decks is Bergie in, right? Very similar card, but it includes the damage payoff as well. This is a deck all of its own. With damage doublers and damage increasing spells, you can pay off rituals with damage, and it's got a decent stat line with first strike. This thing is very pushed. The transformability is easy enough, especially if you're packing rituals and direct damage. And on the back you have the Great Work. It's a saga. Chapter 1, the Great Work deals 3 damage to target opponent and each creature they control. It's like a little mini board wipe. Chapter 2, create 3 treasure tokens until end of turn, and Chapter 3, until end of turn you may cast instant and sorcery spells from any graveyard. If a spell cast this way would be put into a graveyard, exile instead. Exile this thing, return it to the battlefield front face up. Chapter 1 is great, especially if our damage increasing enchantments are out there. Chapter 2 is also nice, I guess, but it feeds nicely into Chapter 3. You're going to need other colors to cast the spells from any graveyard. This thing is awesome. This is going to be one of those chase mythics. I'd be extraordinarily happy to open this in a pack in one of its many variants. If you're running an Izzet or otherwise red including commander deck that's polymorphing, spell slinging, or casting spells in the spells, I mean cards like Jeska's Will, Turnabout, blah blah blah, you know the drill. Urabrask pays off those 20-minute turns with mana and damage, allowing more spells and more damage. I don't know that I necessarily would ever want to flip it. Look at this guy with his fancy fake fingernails. You got Jin-Gitaxias, 3 blue for a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 5/5 with Ward 2. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, draw a card. Has 3 and a blue, exile it, return it to the battlefield, transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery and only if you have 7 or more cards in hand. Jeebus, man. 5/5 Ward 2, card draw straight stapled right on. Know what's 3 mana or greater? All your draw X spells. Also Windfall. This is good enough to run in a Spellslinger deck just by itself, or even an artifact deck, I would say. It says non-creature, so you could even run this in a Super Friends deck and be drawing an extra card every turn as long as you're casting spells greater than 3 mana. The front side is a house, dude. The transformability is easily doable in blue. And this transforms into the Great Synthesis. It's a saga. First chapter, draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. You have no maximum hand size for as long as you control the Great Synthesis. Chapter 2, return all non-Phyrexian creatures to their owner's hands. And Chapter 3, you may cast any number of spells from your hand without paying their mana costs. Exile, return it to the battlefield front face up. Chapter 1 is great, harkens back to the first incarnation of this big monster. Chapter 2 is pretty rad as well. If you hit your own creatures, who cares? You're going to cast them for free with Chapter 3. And if you're building a deck that's really good at drawing cards, then Chapter 3 is likely winning you the game and just dumping your hand onto the battlefield. You got Omniscience, infinite cosmic power, dude. This is a really fun Praetor that's worth flipping and worth building around, I think. Mono Blue does it all, dude. Oh, and what would a set be without Elesh Norn? We need as many Elesh Norn cards as we can possibly get. 2 white for a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 3/5 with Vigilance. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you or a permanent you control, that source's controller loses 2 life unless they pay 1. Has 2 and a white, sacrifice 3 other creatures, exile Elesh Norn, then return it to the battlefield, transformed under its owner's control, activate only as a sorcery. Elesh Norn is efficient and powerful. Token swarms can attack into this. Smaller creatures are dissuaded from attacking into this, those little nuisance attacks. The threat is big evasive creatures. That's what's going to get you. And that attacker might be able to pay the tax as well. This is really good in a deck making lots of tokens because you'll need sack fodder for the transformability. Transforms into a saga called the Argent Etchings. Chapter 1, incubate 2 5 times, then transform all incubator tokens you control. Chapter 2, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain double strike until end of turn. Chapter 3, destroy all other permanents except for artifacts, lands, and Phyrexians. Exile the Argent Etchings, then return it to the battlefield front face up. Okay, Chapter 1 is putting 10 power on the field. Alright, that's not bad, whatever. Chapter 2, that's 15 double striking power plus whatever else you got out there. Chapter 3 is a dang board wipe that rewards you for building into Phyrexians and artifacts. I'm surprised how many cards have been errated to be Phyrexian and create Phyrexian tokens, including the old Splicers and Wormcoil Engine. Also, any mites that are created, like those created by Skrelv's Hive, are Phyrexians. You're also sparing artifacts, so your artifact creatures will survive. That's not super broad, you know, but it creates a lot of artifacts for decks that care about that. Overall, Norn's latest incarnation is interesting, powerful, but maybe not so much of an auto-include as her prior shells. Alright, this guy looks like a wacky inflatable tube man built out of, like, cow bones or something. You got Thrun-Clex, 3 green for a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 6/6 with trample and reach. When Thrun-Clex enters the battlefield, search your library for up to 2 forest cards, reveal them, put them in your hand, and shuffle. Has 6 green, exile it, return it to the battlefield, transformed under its owner's control, activate only as a sorcery. Alright, just full stop on the front. 5 mana, 6/6 with trample, and reach that draws 2 forests, which can be multicolored forests like the Triomes or even Dryad Arbor. Is that worth 5 mana? Heck yeah, dude, of course. The front is great in a beatdown deck, Xenagos, or whatever. The 8 mana transform effect is a ton of mana, but has no other restriction other than the very common among these cards, sorcery speed restriction. Transforms into the Grand Evolution Saga. Don't let fundamentalist Christians get a hold of this, dude. They don't believe in evolution. First chapter, mill 10 cards, put up to 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. Second chapter distributes 7 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. Chapter 3, until the end of turn, creatures you control gain 1. This creature fights target creature you don't control. Exile it and then return it to the battlefield front face up. Again, in a creature-based beatdown deck, hitting 2 creatures and 10 cards is more than doable. Should be between 30 or 40, so 3 to 4 out of 10. Now Chapter 2, buddy, is pretty dope and can benefit from counter-increasing enchantments like Hardened Scales and Doubling Season. If you're in that kind of theme, you're going to be running those cards anyway. So you have a big monster beatdown deck and counter strategies. It's not the narrowest application in the world, but it's a little narrower than we've seen before. Chapter 3 is a great way to use your big fatties to clear the way for a big fatty alpha strike, dude. I like that the third chapter doesn't seem to be the best one. The first is really where it's at. You're getting those free creatures for your 8 mana. And the second seems like the second best, but who knows what the board's going to look like by that point in the game. Overall, this is awesome on the front. I might just keep it there, honestly. Late game, if it survives that long, turning it over will be pretty fun to do. You immediately get the 2 best creatures from the top 10. Well, that's it. That's my take on the Praetors. In summary, I think these are really cool, interesting, if somewhat narrow cards. I think the bonkers abilities on the back are balanced by the high mana cost and the fact that these come on sagas. Sagas aren't amazing in Commander unless they come down early, and these ain't coming down too early. The Chapter 3 effects can be really telegraphed and give opponents lots of time to respond. That said, in a proliferate deck, these can be nasty as they rely on lore counters, so you can just proliferate them. Anyways, listen dudes, have a good rest of your day, enjoy it. Sneaky G from Better Commander signing off.